We are going to talk about focus, real focus, the kind that changes the course of a life, not through motivational slogans or productivity hacks, but through the lives of 9 human beings who mastered attention at a level most of us will never even approach. These are people who faced conditions that should have shattered them. People who had every reason to drift, to give up, to surrender their minds to chaos and fear. And didn't doubt. If you are serious about rebuilding your concentration from the ground up, stay with me. If you've been looking for something that actually goes deep, subscribe to Inner Steel right now and let's get into it. Point 1. The mind that could not stop. Nikola Tesla did not sleep like other men. He did not eat like other men. He did not live like other men. He lived almost entirely inside his own head, and that head contained one of the most concentrated, ferocious, relentlessly focused minds in recorded history. Born in 1856 in what is now Serbia, Tesla displayed an almost frightening capacity for mental concentration from childhood. He could hold entire machines in his mind, not sketches, not rough outlines, but complete, rotating, three-dimensional blueprints, and run them for days, adjusting tolerances, identifying flaws, all before touching a single piece of metal. His laboratory was as much inside his skull as it was in New York. But here is what most people don't know about Tesla. This wasn't a gift. It was a discipline, one he built through brutal, almost obsessive practice. He trained himself to visualize. He trained himself to hold a single idea in the front of his consciousness, and refused to let it go until he had exhausted every angle, every implication, every possibility. He said of his method, "I do not rush into actual work. When I get an idea, I start building it up in my imagination." What Tesla understood, what most of us never grasp, is that focus is not the absence of distraction. It is the active, muscular, daily practice of returning. Returning to the problem. Returning to the image. Returning to the idea. Over and over, with the patience of a man who knows that the mind, like a muscle, grows stronger precisely at the point of resistance. That we live in an age that has convinced us that if something requires effort to maintain attention, it must not be interesting enough. Tesla would have found that idea laughable. He believed that sustained attention was the single most important capacity a human being could develop, because everything else, every invention, every breakthrough, every creation of value, flows from it. The first truth of focus: your mind is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be trained. And training always involves discomfort. When you feel the pull to check your phone mid-task, that is not weakness. That is the exact moment where your training either begins or doesn't. Tesla spent a lifetime choosing, in that moment, to stay. What would you build if you stayed? 2. The Ice and the Decission. On January 19, 1915, Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, became locked in pack ice in the Weddell Sea off Antarctica. It would never be free again. Over the next 10 months, the ice slowly crushed the hull. On November 21, 1915, the Endurance sank into the black water. 27 men stood on the ice with 3 lifeboats, no rescue coming, no radio contact with the outside world, and temperatures that could kill an exposed man in minutes. The nearest inhabited land was over 800 miles away. In conditions like these, the human mind does one of 2 things. It either fractures, splitting between panic and paralysis, oscillating between catastrophic thinking and numbing denial, or it narrows. It narrows like a lens focusing sunlight into a point of fire. Shackleton chose to narrow. Every morning, regardless of what had happened the night before, Shackleton focused on one thing: what could be done today. Not what had been lost. Not what might go wrong tomorrow. Not the overwhelming, impossible mathematics of survival. What could be done today? He maintained routines. He enforced mealtimes. He insisted on singing in the evenings. He managed the psychology of 27 men with the precision of a conductor, because he understood something that most people only grasp in crisis: attention is contagious. When the leader's mind is scattered, frightened, and catastrophizing, the group's mind follows. When the leader's attention is calm, deliberate, and present, the group steadies. Shackleton kept his attention on the solvable problem directly in front of him, and that discipline radiated outward until it held 27 men together across one of the most brutal survival stories in human history. All 27 survived. The second truth of focus: you cannot think about everything at once without thinking about nothing effectively. The mind that tries to hold every problem simultaneously holds none of them with enough clarity to solve. Shackleton did not ignore the larger picture. He simply refused to let the impossible size of it prevent him from working on the possible piece directly in front of him. When your life feels overwhelming, you are likely trying to focus on all of it at once. The question is never, how do I solve everything? The question is always, what is the one thing I can move today? 3. The 4-minute impossibility. For years, doctors, scientists, and coaches agreed, running a mile in under 4 minutes was physically impossible. The human heart, they said, would burst under the strain. The human legs were simply not built for it. It had never been done, and the consensus was that it never would be. Roger Bannister was a medical student at Oxford when he decided the consensus was wrong. What made Bannister remarkable was not just his physical talent. There were other runners as fast or faster, but the architecture of his preparation. He could only train for 45 minutes a day, squeezed between hospital rounds and lectures. He had less time than his competitors, fewer resources, and the entire weight of collective human belief telling him the goal was impossible. So he did something radical. He decided the only thing that mattered was the quality of attention he brought to every single second of those 45 minutes. He did not half-train. He did not show up to the track with his mind still running through his morning's medical cases. He trained with a kind of ferocious, singular presence, every stride considered, every breath monitored, every session reviewed with the analytical precision of a scientist studying a specimen. He visualized the race hundreds of times. He saw himself breaking the tape. He felt the finish before he ever ran it. On May 6, 1954, at Oxford's Iffley Road track, Roger Bannister ran a mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. The impossible was gone. And here is the extraordinary epilogue. Within 46 days, an Australian runner named John Landy broke Bannister's record. Within 3 years, 16 more runners had broken the 4-minute mile. The barrier had never been physical. It had always been mental, a collective limitation of belief and attention that Bannister's focused, relentless preparation dissolved. The third truth of focus: the quality of your attention matters far more than the quantity of your time. Bannister had less time than his rivals and beat them all. Because an hour of diffuse, half-present effort produces less than 10 minutes of total, locked-in concentration. The world will tell you that you don't have enough time. The real question is whether you are fully present for the time you have. Point 4. The man in the TOWR. In 1965, Navy pilot James Stockdale was shot down over North Vietnam. He parachuted into a village, was beaten by the crowd, captured, and taken to the Hanoi Hilton, the notorious prisoner of war camp where American prisoners were tortured, isolated, and subjected to conditions designed to break them completely. Stockdale would spend 7.5 years there. Much of it in solitary confinement. Most of it in leg irons. He was tortured over 20 times. In his first moments after capture, falling through the air, Stockdale made himself a promise. He said later, "I knew I was entering a world of pain. And I knew that the only way I was going to survive was to never confuse faith with optimism." He had read the Stoic philosophers, Epictetus in particular, and the wisdom he carried into that camp would become the foundation of his survival. Epictetus, the Roman Stoic philosopher who had himself been a slave, taught one central idea: divide everything in your life into 2 categories, what is in your control, and what is not. Give your full attention to the first category. Release the second completely. In the Hanoi Hilton, Stockdale could not control whether he was tortured. He could not control when he ate, when he slept, whether he saw sunlight. But he could control where his mind went. He could control the quality of his thinking. He could control his integrity, what he would and would not say under pressure. He focused on those things with the total concentration of a man who understood that the territory of his attention was the last territory no one could take from him. He organized a resistance movement among the prisoners. He developed the tap code through the walls. He led. He adapted. He endured. And in 1973, when the prisoners were released, Admiral James Stockdale walked out of captivity whole, psychologically intact in a way that astonished everyone who knew what he had survived. The fourth truth of focus: the discipline of attention is ultimately about sovereignty. When you allow your mind to be pulled by every distraction, every fear, every opinion, every external event, you are surrendering territory that is yours by right. The Stoic practice of directing your attention only to what you can influence is not passivity. It is the highest form of self-command. Every minute you spend focused on what you cannot change is a minute stolen from what you can. 5. The LOGBOK. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Vienna when the Nazis came. He had a manuscript, a book he had spent years writing, that he believed mattered deeply, that he thought could help people. When he was deported to Auschwitz in 1942, the manuscript was taken from him and destroyed. What happened next is one of the most remarkable acts of concentrated mental will in the 20th century. Frankl decided to rewrite the book, inside his head. In a concentration camp. While being subjected to forced labor, starvation, and conditions that reduced most of the people around him to a state beyond thinking, beyond hoping, beyond caring. He reconstructed paragraphs. He developed arguments. He refined ideas. On stolen scraps of paper, in the margins of whatever he could find, he made notes. He held the project in his mind as a living thing, something that existed beyond the wire and the guards and the crematoria, something that the camp could not touch because it lived entirely in the domain of his attention. He survived. And the book he reconstructed and completed after liberation, Man's Search for Meaning, has sold over 16 million copies and is consistently ranked among the most influential books ever written. Frankl later wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." He was not speaking abstractly. He had tested that proposition in the most extreme laboratory imaginable and found it true. The fifth truth of focus: meaning sustains attention in a way that discipline alone cannot. When Frankl worked on his manuscript inside Auschwitz, he was not forcing himself to concentrate through gritted teeth willpower. He was drawn towards something that mattered to him so profoundly that the pull of it overcame the enormity of the conditions around him. When you struggle to focus, the first question to ask is not how, it is why. Because a mind that knows why it is working will find the how. A mind that has lost the why will wander no matter how many productivity systems you build around it. 6. The Cave and the Compass. In 1962, Michel Siffry, a 23-year-old French geologist, descended alone into a glacier cave in the Alps and stayed for 2 months. No clock. No calendar. No sunlight. No contact with the surface world except for a telephone he could use to tell researchers when he slept and woke. He wanted to study what happened to human consciousness without the structure of time. What he discovered changed how neuroscientists understood the brain. Without external time cues, his sleep cycles expanded and contracted unpredictably. His sense of duration collapsed. A day felt like an hour felt like a day. He lost the ability to accurately judge how much time had passed. When he finally emerged after 61 days, he thought he had only been down there for 34. But here is what is less often reported. In the cave, Siffry found that the quality of his focus changed entirely. Without the constant interruption of social life, news, conversation, and obligation, his attention deepened to a level he had never experienced above ground. He began to notice things. Textures of rock, patterns of water, the behavior of a single spider he befriended, with a sensory precision that felt almost hallucinatory. He was bored and lonely, and sometimes frightened. But he was also, in a way he struggled to articulate afterward, more present than he had ever been. He repeated the experiment in 1972, this time for 6 months. The results deepened everything he had found the first time. The sixth truth of focus: your environment is not neutral. It is either supporting your capacity for deep attention or actively destroying it. Siffry's cave stripped away every competing stimulus, and his focus expanded to fill the space. Your life above ground is the opposite, a cave of constant competing stimulation in which your attention is continuously fragmented. You will not go underground for 6 months. But you can build deliberate pockets of silence, genuine, technology-free, commitment-free silence, and watch what your mind does when you stop feeding it noise. Most people are afraid of what they might find. What they actually find, almost always, is clarity. Point 7. The ultramarathon of the SELF. David Goggins did not have a good start. Raised in poverty, subjected to an abusive father, struggling with undiagnosed learning disabilities in school, overweight, working a pest control job that was slowly killing his spirit. By his mid-20s, Goggins had every statistical reason to become a cautionary tale. Then he decided to become a Navy SEAL. He weighed almost 300 pounds. The maximum weight for his height was 191. He had roughly 3 months to lose almost 100 pounds and pass a preliminary fitness test. He was also, in the process, going to have to teach himself to swim, a skill he did not have, and to run distances that had previously seemed impossible to him. What Goggins discovered in that period, and what he has spent the years since articulating, imperfectly but powerfully, is what he calls the 40% rule. When your mind tells you that you are done, that you have given everything, that you cannot possibly continue, you are, in fact, at approximately 40% of your actual capacity. The voice that says stop is not reporting a physiological fact. It is running a protection protocol. It is your brain's attempt to preserve comfort by presenting exhaustion as a wall when it is actually a door. Goggins passed the test. Went through SEAL training. Failed. Went through again. Failed. Went through a third time and graduated. He went on to set a world record in pull-ups, 4,030 in 17 hours, and to complete some of the most grueling endurance races on the planet, often on almost no preparation and in conditions that broke trained athletes. But the story that matters most is smaller than any of those records. It is the story of a man sitting in a pool at 2 a.m, terrified of the water, refusing to get out until he had swum the required distance, not because he had a coach watching, not because anyone was keeping score, but because he had made himself a promise. He had decided that his attention would belong to his goal and not to his fear. And he held that decision, over and over, through conditions that would have sent most people home. The seventh truth of focus. The voice in your head that tells you to stop is not your enemy. It is information. It is telling you where the edge of your current capacity is. And the practice of focus, the practice of staying on task past the point of comfort, is the practice of expanding that edge outward, one refusal to quit at a time. The mind that learns to function past discomfort is a mind that can do almost anything. The mind that stops at the first feeling of resistance is a mind that will always be limited by that first feeling. Point 8. The Cathedral and the Stitch. In 1508, Pope Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was a sculptor. He did not consider himself a painter. He argued, he resisted, he complained to anyone who would listen that he was the wrong man for the job. Julius insisted. What followed was 4 years of work that has no real parallel in the history of art. Michelangelo lay on scaffolding 60 feet above the floor, paint dripping into his eyes, his neck and back in constant agony, his eyesight damaged to the point where he had to hold documents at arm's length for years after. He painted approximately 5,000 square feet of ceiling. He painted 343 figures. He fired his assistants because their work did not meet his standard and painted most of it himself. He wrote, in letters from the period, about the physical and psychological cost of the work. But he also wrote about something else, the state he entered when the work was going well. A state of such complete absorption that time disappeared, pain receded, and there was only the problem of the next figure, the next face, the next fold of cloth. He was not happy exactly. He was too exhausted and aching for happiness. But he was completely alive in a way that, he wrote, he had never been at any other point in his life. What Michelangelo experienced, and what psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi would spend his career documenting and naming 4 centuries later, is what we now call flow. The state of optimal experience in which challenge and skill are so precisely matched that the self disappears and only the work remains. It is not a gift bestowed on the specially talented. It is a state achievable by any human being who engages deeply enough with a task that matters to them. But flow does not arrive on demand. It arrives as a result of preparation, of skill developed through repetition, of a task chosen with genuine care, of an environment protected from interruption long enough for the initial friction of starting to dissolve into the flow state beneath it. The people who experience flow most reliably are not the most naturally talented. They are the most consistently prepared. The eighth truth of focus: deep work produces a quality of experience that shallow, distracted work cannot approach. The person who spends 6 hours bouncing between email and social media and half-finished tasks ends the day feeling simultaneously exhausted and unaccomplished. The particular misery of effort without depth. The person who spends 2 hours in genuine, locked-in concentration on meaningful work ends the day feeling alive. You are not just trying to be more productive. You are trying to access a quality of experience that is available to you, that you were built for, and that the modern world is systematically preventing you from reaching. Point 9. The emperor's notebook Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the world. Emperor of Rome at the height of its power, commander of the greatest military force in history, ruler of a civilization that spanned from Scotland to Mesopotamia. He also spent 12 years fighting a relentless plague that killed up to 2,000 Romans a day, managing a military campaign on the Danube that required his constant presence away from the capital, dealing with a co-emperor who was his inferior in almost every respect, and navigating a political landscape where assassination was always a possibility. In the middle of all of this, in his tent, in the field, exhausted and responsible for millions of lives, Marcus Aurelius wrote a journal. Not for publication. Not for posterity. For himself. A daily practice of returning his attention to what he believed and who he was trying to be, against the enormous pressure of a life that must have made sustained thought almost impossible. We know this journal as the Meditations. And it is not a book of answers. It is a book of a man repeatedly, patiently, sometimes desperately returning his attention to the same handful of ideas, that the present moment is all you have, that your judgments about events are more powerful than the events themselves, that virtue is the only thing genuinely within your control, that time passes regardless of what you do with it, that you will die. And this should sharpen rather than diminish your attention to life. He wrote the same things over and over. He reminded himself of the same principles dozens of times. Not because he was simple, but because the practice of returning is itself the point. Focus is not a state you achieve and then maintain permanently. It is a direction you set and then return to, again and again, every time the noise of the world pulls you away. The man who returns 1,000 times has practiced 1,000 times. The man who drifts and stays drifted has practiced nothing. The ninth truth of focus. The mind is not a machine that, once properly configured, runs without adjustment. It is a living thing that requires continuous tending. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the known world, sat down every day and did the equivalent of recalibrating his compass. Not because he had lost his way, but because maintaining direction requires active, ongoing effort. The question is not whether you will drift. You will drift. The question is how quickly you catch it and how reliably you return. And we started with a simple truth: you are not broken. You are distracted. But now you know something more than that. You know what it looks like when a human being refuses to be distracted, when a man rebuilds a manuscript in his head inside a concentration camp, when a woman trains for 45 minutes a day and breaks the barrier everyone said was physical, when a soldier holds his mind together in a cage for 7.5 years because the Stoics taught him which territory was